The words dangled in the air, sharp and heavy as splinters of glass. "Mom," Millie had whispered, a tremor only, but one that split the world in half. How could you? The question wasn't shrieked, wasn't a raging tantrum, but that quiet tremor was so much worse. It was the sound of my world crashing down, the ground crumbling beneath my feet, leaving me balancing on the precipice of a chasm. Her tear-streaked and pale face shone in the faint porch light. Her bright, piercing eyes had dulled to hurt, clouding the pain in them. Betrayal hummed through the suffocating silence, a scream that did not have to be voiced to be deafening. It hung in the cold air, tainting everything in our house. My heart sank. It wasn't guilt, not really. It was a gut-wrenching pain, a physical embodiment of what I had done wrong. My breath caught in my throat, words deserting me, disintegrating into nothingness before I could even muster them. "Millie," I began, my voice breaking like autumn leaves beneath my feet. I never meant..." She shook her head, a tiny, jerky motion that magnified the seismic shift in our tiny universe. "Lied to me," she choked out, the words all thick with unshed tears. "You lied to me. You kissed him." Kissed him. The words rang back, bold and incontrovertible. In the thrill of that stolen moment with Fred, I had forgotten the web of deceit I was spinning, the tenuous threads of trust I was so recklessly rending asunder. Now, Millie's voice tore through that tenuous veil of self-deception, revealing the raw, ugly truth. I did reach out, a mother's impulse to comfort. Yet, when I laid my hand on her arm, she pulled away sharply, as if my touch burned her. The rejection was a blow that cut the tie between us. Betrayal in her eyes mirrored my "Monstrous self, how could you do that to me?" she repeated, emphasizing to me more than the act. It was not just the kiss with Fred. It was the severing of our bond, shattering her innocent world. To her, I was not just imperfect. I was a motherhood betrayer, a trust breaker, a hypocrite, who preached honesty but lived deceit. "There's not much to it," I stuttered, the words empty. How could I define the indefinable? It was more than that. A tempest of desires, a split second of recklessness, a disastrous failure of judgment. But no words could heal the wound I'd caused. "I know, baby," I whispered, the term of endearment ringing untrue coming from my actions. "I did wrong and hurt you." Tears streamed down her face, creating shining tracks down her deathly pale cheeks. I ached to take her into my arms, to hold her tight until the storm was over, as I had so many times since she was an infant. But that solace was no longer mine to give, no longer hers to receive. The haven of our mother-daughter relationship, once so safe, was now irretrievably broken. "I will spend my entire life making it up to you," I vowed, sincere and desperate. "Please believe me, I never intended this." It was the raw truth, unapologetic. I did not intend to hurt or betray her. But intent was beside the point in light of the stark, hard reality of what I had done, and its impact on her. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge my desperate words. She sat, quaking with silent tears, her eyes fixed on some point far, away beyond reach. I was utterly alone, even inches away from my daughter. The silence was oppressive, thick with unspoken grief and shattered expectations. I knew forgiveness would be a long time coming, if ever. I knelt beside her, allowing her to cry without touching her, not knowing if I deserved to. But her tears and pain strengthened my resolve. No more lies or secrets. I needed to fix what I broke, even at the expense of losing hope with Fred and being forced to live with Millie's alienation. For Millie. For me. She would always come first, the hurtful truth ruling every labored breath I drew. It would be lengthy and painful. Yet, I had to start walking it for her and us, step by step. The following days bled into one another, each marked by the same oppressive silence that had settled between Millie and me. It was a silence thicker than any sound, a constant, aching presence in our small house. Mornings began with a strained, wordless breakfast. I would set out Millie's usual cereal and place a glass of juice beside it, my movements careful, almost reverent, as if handling fragile relics. Millie would come to the kitchen, her eyes shadowed and distant, take her place at the table without a word, and eat mechanically, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the chipped formica countertop. Every rustle of cereal, every clink of silverware against the bowl was amplified in the vacuum of our unspoken grief. I'd try to initiate conversation, my voice tentative, like testing thin ice. "Did you sleep okay, honey?" Or, "Anything you need for school today?" My words would hang in the air, unanswered, before dissolving into the heavy quiet. Sometimes Millie would offer a curt nod or shake of her head, her eyes never meeting mine, her responses minimal as if conserving energy in this emotionally depleted landscape. Evenings were worse. The shared comfort of dinner, once a ritual of connection and conversation, became a battlefield of unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. I'd prepare meals with a leaden heart, each clanging pot and chopping knife a sharp reminder of the warmth and laughter that had vanished from our kitchen. Millie would eat sparingly, pushing food around her plate, her appetite seemingly extinguished by the emotional turmoil. The television flickered in the living room after dinner, a pale imitation of shared evenings. We'd sit on opposite ends of the sofa, miles apart in spirit, the screen's flickering light casting long, distorted shadows across the room, mirroring the distortions within our relationship. My attempts at reconciliation were clumsy, ill-fated ventures into a minefield of hurt. A hesitant, "I'm really sorry, Millie," would be met with a stony silence or a barely perceptible shrug that conveyed volumes of wounded indifference. A gentle hand placed on her shoulder would be shrugged off, leaving my arm hanging awkwardly in the air, heavy with unspoken apology and unaccepted remorse. I tried to leave notes on her bed, small cards with heartfelt words, expressions of love and regret, promises to do better. They would disappear from her room, only to reappear days later, crumpled at the bottom of the trash bin, silent testaments to my failed attempts at connection. Sleep offered little respite. The image of Fred's face, the ghost of his lips on mine, would flicker at the edges of my consciousness, mingling with the constant, gnawing guilt about Millie. Dreams were fractured, filled with distorted images and muffled whispers. I'd wake in the pre-dawn hours, heart pounding, the weight of my betrayal pressing down on me like a physical burden. The promise I'd made to myself, to be honest and to repair the damage, felt overwhelming, almost impossible. The silence in the house echoed the silence within me. My voice felt foreign, my laughter a distant memory. I moved through my days like a ghost in my own life, going through the motions of work and routine, but feeling utterly disconnected from everything and everyone. The vibrant colors of the world seemed to have muted, the sounds dulled. The very air I breathed felt heavy with the weight of my mistake. I was adrift in a sea of guilt and regret, the shore of forgiveness from Millie and myself, feeling impossibly far away, shrouded in a dense, impenetrable fog of silence. The walls of our home, once a haven, had become the walls of a prison, confining us both in our separate, silent sorrows. The forbidden attraction to Fred That spark that had ignited in the shadows of his window refused to be extinguished by the deluge of guilt and remorse that now consumed me. It was a cruel paradox, a persistent flicker of something I shouldn't feel, amidst the wreckage I'd created. The memory of his touch, the brief stolen warmth of his lips, would surface unexpectedly, intrusive and unwelcome, like a phantom limb aching with a desire I could no longer afford to entertain. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, when the house was still and Millie retreated behind the closed door of her room, I'd find myself drawn to the window, my gaze drifting involuntarily towards Fred's house next door. It wasn't a conscious pursuit, more like a moth drawn to a flame, a painful, self-flagellating form of curiosity. I'd see his shadow move behind his curtains, hear the faint murmur of music drifting from his open window on warmer days, and a strange ache, a twisted longing mixed with self-disgust, would twist in my stomach. These moments were fleeting, quickly crushed under the weight of guilt. The image of Millie's tear-stained face would flash in my mind, a stark and immediate reminder of the price of my fleeting lapse in judgment. The warmth of desire would instantly turn to icy shame, the phantom touch replaced by the sharp sting of self-reproach. How could I even think of him, feel even a flicker of that forbidden spark, when my daughter was suffering so deeply because of my actions? The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I wore through every waking moment. It was there when I woke in the morning, a leaden weight in my chest. It followed me to work, coloring every interaction, and it settled beside me in the silence of my bed each night. Every smile from a colleague, every mundane task completed, felt tainted, undeserved. I was living a lie, carrying a secret shame that separated me from everyone around me. I felt like an imposter in my own life, a fraud in the role of mother, friend, colleague. I began to actively avoid any potential reminders of Fred. I took different routes to work, consciously averted my gaze from his house when I was outside, even avoided going to the park altogether, the place where our illicit encounter had occurred. It was a futile attempt to outrun my mind, to erase the memory of a moment that had irrevocably altered the course of my life. The park bench, once a place of quiet contemplation, now felt like hallowed ground, stained with the mark of my transgression. Sleep, when it came, was often haunted by nightmares. Sometimes I dreamt of Millie, her face dissolving into a mask of pain, her eyes accusatory and filled with tears that seemed to turn to blood. Other times, Fred would appear in my dreams, his image shifting between the boyish neighbor and a shadowy figure of temptation, whispering promises I knew I shouldn't listen to. I'd wake up tangled in the sheets, drenched in cold sweat, the line between dream and reality blurred, the guilt and shame bleeding into every corner of my existence. Despite the overwhelming guilt, a tiny, stubborn part of me, buried deep beneath layers of self-reproach, still flickered with a memory of that stolen kiss, that brief moment of feeling alive and desired again. It was a dangerous ember, a treacherous flame that I knew I had to extinguish completely. But in the lonely silence of the nights, battling the heavy cloak of guilt and the cold wall of Millie's estrangement, the phantom warmth of that forbidden desire was sometimes the only thing that felt remotely, disturbingly, real. It was a testament to the chaotic complexity of human emotion, the unsettling truth that desire, once awakened, doesn't simply vanish, even in the face of devastating consequences. My penance, I knew, was to carry both the crushing weight of my guilt and the unwelcome ghost of a desire I could never, and should never, indulge again. The world outside our strained household, once a backdrop to my life, began to intrude with a subtle yet chilling presence. It started with glances, fleeting and almost imperceptible, from neighbors I usually exchanged friendly waves with. Now, Their smiles seemed strained, their eyes lingering just a fraction too long, carrying a weight of unspoken judgment. Mrs. Henderson, the kindly elderly woman across the street who always complimented Millie's school projects, now simply nodded, curtly when we passed, her usual warmth replaced by a polite but distant coolness. At the grocery store, Mrs. Davis, Millie's friend Sarah's mother, whom I often chatted with about school events and teenage woes, avoided eye contact entirely, steering her cart down a different aisle as soon as she saw me. The casual greetings from other parents at school events became shorter and less frequent, punctuated by an almost palpable awkwardness. It was as if an invisible barrier had sprung up around me, separating me from the easy camaraderie I'd once taken for granted. The whispers started subtly, carried on the wind like fallen leaves. I'd overhear snippets of conversations as I passed, groups of women chatting outside the bakery or at the school gate. Daisy, neighbor, daughter. The fragments of words hanging in the air like accusations. Sometimes I'd catch my name spoken, followed by hushed tones and averted gazes when I turned my head. It was a chilling, insidious form of judgment, the murmur of a community observing, dissecting, and condemning. Social isolation was subtle but profound. Invitations to neighborhood gatherings dwindled, and phone calls from casual acquaintances became less frequent. I felt myself becoming increasingly invisible, fading into the background of my own life, perceived not as Daisy, the working mother and friendly neighbor, but as Daisy, the woman who had kissed her daughter's friend. The label, unspoken yet ever present, felt like a scarlet letter, branding me in the eyes of my community. Millie, too, was not immune to the ripple effect of my actions. I saw her friends whispering amongst themselves when she approached, their smiles faltering as she joined their circle. Sometimes I'd catch her casting quick, worried glances around the schoolyard, her usual confident stride replaced by a hesitant, almost apologetic gait. The shame was not just mine to bear. It was casting a long shadow over Millie's young life as well, further deepening my guilt and fueling my self-reproach. The weight of social judgment, though largely unspoken, was suffocating. It amplified my existing guilt, turning it into a crushing sense of shame. I felt exposed, vulnerable, judged by eyes I couldn't even see clearly, voices I only half heard. It was a chilling reminder that my actions had consequences that extended far beyond my immediate relationship with Millie. They had seeped into the fabric of my community, altering perceptions, eroding trust, and leaving me adrift in a sea of unspoken disapproval. The shadows of gossip and judgment stretched long and cold, isolating me further in my self-made prison of guilt and regret. The world, once a place of everyday interactions and casual connections, now felt like a hostile landscape filled with judging eyes and whispered condemnations, a constant painful reminder of my profound failure. Months crawled by, each marked by the slow glacial movement of healing. Or perhaps just the slow agonizing process of learning to live with a wound that might never fully close. The explosive fury of Millie's initial confrontation had subsided, replaced by a quiet, persistent sadness, a deep chasm of emotional distance that remained stubbornly unbridged. The silence in our house lessened, replaced by cautious, functional exchanges. Logistical conversations about school, schedules, groceries, the mundane necessities of daily life. But the warmth, the easy laughter, and the effortless connection remained absent, ghosts of a happier past that lingered in the corners of our home. I continued in therapy, the weekly sessions becoming a fragile lifeline in my sea of guilt, talking about my past, about the fear of vulnerability instilled by my failed marriage, about the unexpected eruption of desire and the catastrophic choices it had fueled, was a slow, painful excavation of buried emotions. The therapist listened, patiently, offering gentle guidance and prompting self-reflection, but offering no easy answers and no quick fixes for the deep-seated damage I had inflicted. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to understand the complex tapestry of motivations and vulnerabilities that had led me to that park bench, to that kiss, to this fractured present. Reconciliation with Millie was a slow, uneven dance of tentative steps forward, followed by inevitable stumbles back. There were moments of fragile connection. A shared laugh at a silly TV show. A brief, almost accidental brush of hands while reaching for the same dish. A flicker of something akin to the old warmth in her eyes when she asked for help with homework. These fleeting moments were precious, fragile as spun glass, offering a glimmer of hope, a whisper of possibility that maybe, someday, things could be different, if not the same. But these moments were often followed by setbacks. A carelessly chosen word, a misunderstood gesture, a resurfacing memory could send us spiraling back into silence and distance. Trust, once broken, was a fractured thing, mending slowly, leaving behind visible scars, points of fragility that ached at the slightest pressure. Millie remained guarded, watchful, her forgiveness, if it was ever truly offered, a long way off. Fred had receded from our lives, a ghost of a presence. I saw him occasionally in the neighborhood, always from a distance, a fleeting glimpse of his figure disappearing around a corner. We never spoke again after that night in the park. Whether he avoided me consciously or simply faded back into the background of our lives, I didn't know. In a way, his absence was a relief, removing the immediate temptation and allowing me to focus, however imperfectly, on the arduous task of rebuilding my relationship with Millie and confronting the wreckage within myself. Years passed. The sharp edges of the pain softened with time, the raw ache becoming a duller, more persistent throb. Life moved forward, as it always does, carrying us along its relentless current. Millie grew into a young woman, independent and resilient, forging her own path in the world. Our relationship evolved too. The easy intimacy of the past was gone, replaced by a more measured, cautious affection. We learned to navigate our new reality, to build a different kind of bond, one forged not on naive trust, but on a hard-won understanding of vulnerability, forgiveness, and the enduring, if sometimes fragile, strength of the mother-daughter connection. Looking back from the vantage point of years, I see that chasm I stood on the edge of that night in the park, the one I felt myself fall into, did not swallow me whole. The fall was devastating, the impact shattering. But somewhere, amidst the wreckage, a path towards a different kind of redemption began to emerge. It wasn't the redemption of erasing the past, of undoing my mistakes, but a quieter, more profound redemption of learning to live with the consequences, to own my flaws, to strive for honesty, and to rebuild, piece by painful piece, a connection with my daughter and with myself from the fragments of what was broken. The shore of forgiveness, once impossibly distant, eventually, slowly, came into view. Not as a destination reached, but as a direction, a continuous journey, a lifelong process of striving to be worthy of the love I had so carelessly risked losing. Thank you for listening to me. Drop a comment below if you liked it. Don't miss any infidelity story. Subscribe now and turn on notifications.